The rain wasn't gentle that night. It came down like judgment, cold, unrelenting, and loud against the marble awnings of the Winslow Corporation Tower. Charlotte stood at the top of the stairs, arms wrapped around herself, her once immaculate cream coat now soaked and clinging to her body like defeat. The doorman hadn't even looked her in the eyes when he pulled the glass doors shut behind her. 1 month ago, she would have fired him for it. Now, she had no job to do it with. No title, no address, no family, no ring, only a growing baby, and the echo of boardroom applause replaced by whispers of scandal. Charlotte Winslow, the woman who had once been the face of generational wealth and power, had become a ghost in her own life. Just hours before, she had sat in a glass-walled boardroom, listening to her father speak about legacy with the same voice he used in media interviews. Polished, precise, heartless. "We cannot allow personal disgrace to damage the brand," he'd said without flinching. "You'll step down today." The air had left her lungs. The child she hadn't yet told anyone about had squirmed inside her as if even it could feel the rejection. Her mother hadn't even looked up from her teacup. No one asked who the father was. No one asked if she was okay. By midnight, Charlotte was nowhere, just a drenched woman with blistered feet and no idea where to go. The rain pushed her further into the city, down streets she had only ever seen from tinted windows. Her phone battery had died hours ago. The weight of exhaustion pulled her to the stoop of an old brick building with chipping paint and flickering lights. She sank to the cold stone steps like gravity had claimed her soul. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she remembered the voice that woke her. Low, steady, kind. "You all right?" She blinked up into a face shadowed by the porch light. A man in a Navy janitor uniform, sleeves pushed up over his forearms, a ring of keys hanging from his belt. "Come inside," he said, without asking her name or her story. "You're freezing." She tried to speak, but the lump in her throat was thick. All she could do was nod. Inside, the apartment lobby was old but warm. The light hummed overhead. A faded sofa sat under a dusty ceiling fan. The man grabbed a folded blanket from behind the counter and handed it to her. "Sit. I'll get you something warm," he said. His name tag read Marcus Hale. He disappeared into the back, then returned with a mug of tea and a towel. "I don't normally open the door for strangers at 3 a.m., he added, a quiet smirk in his voice. "But you don't look like trouble." Charlotte let out the smallest, broken laugh. "I used to be someone," she whispered. Marcus sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "You still are," he said simply. "Just maybe not to the people who should have seen it." They didn't talk much after that. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was survival. Like neither had the energy to unpack their own ruin just yet. She fell asleep on the couch. When she woke, it was morning. The sun through the windows was dull, and her coat had been draped over her like a blanket. A sticky note was left beside her. "Apartment 4B is empty. No hot water, but the roof doesn't leak. Keys under the mat. M." Charlotte sat there for a long time, staring at the note. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was an opening. And for someone who'd had every door slammed shut, that was enough to make her cry for the first time in weeks. Later that day, she opened the creaking door to apartment 4B. It was small, worn down. The walls were stained, and the window rattled when the wind blew. The heater groaned like it hadn't been touched in years. But it was hers. No one could take it from her. She sat on the floor in the middle of the room and touched her stomach. The baby kicked soft, but real, like it knew. She wasn't done. Not yet. Downstairs, Marcus was mopping the hallway when his daughter ran silently into his arms. a tiny thing with a bunny clutched in one hand and tangled hair falling into her eyes. "She's still here," Sophie said softly. Marcus glanced up toward the ceiling. "Yeah," he murmured. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone in the world. Charlotte had lived in penthouses, 5-star hotels, and glass-walled suites that kissed the skyline. Now, she was learning how to live in silence. Apartment 4B smelled like old wood and dust. The heater clicked at odd intervals. There was no furniture, just a cracked mirror on the closet door and the kind of faded wallpaper that made you wonder about all the people who had lived there before. But there was no noise. No board meetings. No urgent calls. No cold voices saying, "You've disappointed us." Just the hum of old pipes and the sound of her own breath. She sat on the floor with a grocery bag Marcus had quietly left at her door. A loaf of bread, a few apples, peanut butter, and prenatal vitamins, no note this time. Just quiet thoughtfulness. It was strange. For the first time in her life, no one was expecting anything from her, and that was terrifying. She tried cleaning the bathroom to distract herself. The faucet sputtered rust. The tiles were cracked. But she scrubbed until her hands ached, until the tears came not out of sadness, but something deeper. Shame, exhaustion, grief for a life that no longer fit her. Later that evening, a soft knock came at the door. She hesitated, then opened it slowly. There stood Marcus, holding a toolbox in one hand and a flashlight tucked under his arm. "You got heat, but the water's probably screaming in protest," he said. "Mind if I take a look?" Charlotte stepped aside without a word. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He worked in silence, adjusting valves and muttering to himself. She watched him, strong, steady hands, sleeves rolled up, veins like cords under his skin. "How do you know how to fix things?" she asked finally. He didn't look up. "Used to be an engineer." Then, life happened. She waited for him to elaborate. He didn't, just like she didn't tell him about the press scandal, the broken engagement, or the empire she once ruled. Sometimes, broken people speak best in silence. As he packed up, a small voice echoed from the hallway. "Daddy?" Marcus turned. "Hey, Soph. Thought you were watching your cartoons." Charlotte peeked out and saw a little girl standing in the doorway across the hall. Thin frame. Blue eyes. A pink stuffed bunny clutched tightly to her chest. "She wanted to see who moved in," Marcus said softly. Charlotte knelt a little, eye level with the girl. "Hi, I'm Charlotte." Sophie didn't answer, just stared curious but guarded. "She doesn't talk much," Marcus said, ruffling her hair. "Not since her mom passed." Charlotte's eyes softened. "Oh," she breathed. A silence stretched between them, sad but not uncomfortable. Then, without a word, Sophie walked up to Charlotte and handed her the bunny. Charlotte blinked. "Is this for me?" Sophie nodded. Marcus raised his brows. "She doesn't usually do that." Charlotte looked down at the soft, faded toy. Something inside her chest cracked open. "Thank you," she whispered. Sophie only smiled faintly, then turned and disappeared back into their apartment. That night, Charlotte sat on the apartment floor, bunny in hand, her back against the wall. The wind howled through the window frame. She could hear Marcus humming softly as he washed dishes in the next unit. It wasn't home. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was disappearing. The next morning, she stepped out with her coat wrapped tight and hair pulled back. She needed to feel useful again, to move, to earn her own way, even if it meant sweeping hallways or scrubbing floors. She found Marcus in the back courtyard, fixing a busted drain pipe. "I want to help," she said. He looked up from his work, squinting into the Sunday. "With what?" Work, cleaning, repairs, whatever you've got. You don't have to. I do." Marcus hesitated, then handed her a broom. "All right then. Let's start with the 3rd floor. Elevator's busted, so it stairs all the way." She took the broom without flinching. They worked quietly, room by room, hallway by hallway. She learned where the floorboards creaked, where the paint peeled in curled ribbons, where the tenants left crumbs that fed armies of ants. She learned to scrub, to bend, to listen. And Marcus? He noticed things too. Like how Charlotte flinched at sudden noises. How she wrapped her arms around herself when someone mentioned family. How she never once asked for sympathy. She was learning to be small in a world that once treated her like royalty. And he respected that. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, they sat outside on the stoop under a flickering street lamp. No big conversation, just cool air and distant sirens. Charlotte spoke first. "You know, my father said people like you were invisible, that the world only notices suits and degrees." Marcus took a long sip from his coffee. "He's not wrong," he said. "But sometimes, being invisible means you get to see everything." She looked over at him. "What do you see now?" He met her gaze, steady and calm. A woman who's still fighting, even when she thinks she's lost. Charlotte looked away, her throat tightening. "Don't say that," she whispered. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to. You're still standing. That's enough." And in that moment, Charlotte realized something. She didn't need a penthouse, or power, or approval from a name that had never really loved her. She just needed space to breathe. And maybe someone who saw her. Not the CEO, not the scandal. Just her. The warmth that had started to form in apartment 4B was fragile, like glass held together by careful hands and unspoken understandings. Charlotte had found a rhythm. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't clean, but it was real. Morning light through broken blinds. Cleaning supplies under her sink. Bread with peanut butter and banana slices on a chipped plate. Sophie giggling once, just once, when Charlotte accidentally spilled soapy water across the floor. She was learning how to live again. How to be seen, not managed. How to be human, not a headline. But ghosts don't ask permission to return. They find you when you finally stop looking over your shoulder. And Charlotte's ghost wore Italian leather shoes and carried a last name that once built empires. It was a Tuesday. The building smelled like rain and bleach. Charlotte had just finished fixing a broken latch on the laundry room door when she heard Marcus call out from the front lobby. "Charlotte?" She stepped into the hallway, wiping her hands on her jeans. Marcus's eyes were guarded. "You have visitors." Her breath caught. There, standing in the lobby like they'd been carved from stone, were her parents, Elliot and Meredith Winslow, unbothered by the water stains on the walls, immune to the smell of poverty, standing like they still owned every room they walked into. Charlotte's spine straightened, but her throat was suddenly dry. "May we speak privately?" her father asked, already expecting a yes. Charlotte looked over at Marcus, then back at her mother, whose face showed no emotion, just that faint, familiar wrinkle of disapproval near her brow. Without a word, Charlotte led them into the small common room by the mailboxes. They didn't sit. Her mother glanced at the cracked walls and winced. Her father cleared his throat. "Charlotte," he began, like he was chairing a meeting, "we've had time to reflect. And while we stand by our decision regarding your resignation, the public attention on your disappearance has grown inconvenient." "Well, after wine." Charlotte blinked. "Inconvenient. Yes, paparazzi are beginning to speculate. Investors are uneasy. There's talk of instability. We need to control the narrative." Charlotte stared. "So, you want me to come back?" Elliot adjusted his cufflinks. "We're prepared to release a statement. Say you took a sabbatical for your health. You'll be welcomed back in a limited advisory role, nothing too public, of course. But you'll be safe. Comfortable." Meredith finally spoke. "We can't have you giving birth in a place like this." Charlotte felt something rise in her chest, a slow burn. It wasn't anger at first. It was something colder, clearer. "Why now?" she asked. Elliot's expression didn't change. "Because legacy matters, Charlotte. You're still a Winslow." She looked around the room. The crooked picture frame, the stained carpet, the echo of Marcus's footsteps in the hall. "I don't want your version of safe," she said. Meredith's eyes narrowed. "Is this about the janitor?" Charlotte felt her jaw tighten. "He's a man," she said, "who offered me help when my own family left me on a sidewalk in the rain." Meredith looked like she'd been slapped. Elliot's voice sharpened. "You are throwing away everything we built." "No," Charlotte said softly. "You threw me away. I'm just learning how to survive without pretending it didn't hurt." She walked past them, back toward the hallway, back toward her new life. "Charlotte," her father called after her, "you'll regret this." She turned once more, steady now. "No," she said. "I regret letting you decide my worth for so long." She didn't cry when they left. She didn't shatter like she used to. She just stood in the hallway, breathing. Marcus was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He didn't say anything. Didn't ask. He just nodded once. Like he understood exactly what she had just done. Later that night, as they sat outside again with coffee and paper cups, Marcus finally spoke. "They'll come back," he said. "People like that don't give up control easily." Charlotte looked up at the stars. They barely shone past the streetlights and haze. "Let them come," she whispered. "They can't take what I've already rebuilt." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "You know," he said, "you're braver than you think." She smiled faintly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." A sudden noise made them both look up. Sophie, standing in the doorway with her bunny in one hand and a drawing in the other. She walked over to Charlotte, handed her the paper, and pointed. It was a crayon sketch. 3 stick figures, one tall with messy hair, one with a round belly, and one small with a bunny, all holding hands. Charlotte blinked. "Is that me?" Sophie nodded. Marcus looked away, blinking too quickly. Charlotte clutched the drawing like it was gold. "You okay with that?" she asked him gently. Marcus nodded, a lump in his throat. "Yeah," he said, "more than okay." And just like that, the 3 of them, an ex-CEO, a janitor, and a quiet little girl, sat under the stars like a family drawn in crayon. Not perfect, but real. The air had shifted. Not in the weather, though a storm was brewing, but in something deeper. In the quiet, invisible threads between Charlotte and Marcus. Since her parents left, she hadn't looked back. She didn't have to. She had everything she needed now. Or so she thought. It began with a phone call. Marcus stood outside, pressed against the brick wall, his face pale under the flickering security light. He thought Charlotte was asleep. She wasn't. She heard his voice through the cracked open window of apartment 4B, low, strained, unfamiliar. "Number I told you, I can't be involved anymore. I said I left that life behind." A pause. "Don't bring her into this." Charlotte sat still on her mattress, heart thudding. That voice wasn't the Marcus she knew. This one was sharper. Guarded. Edged with something. Dangerous. When he came in to fix the heater the next morning, she didn't say anything. Just watched the way his jaw stayed tight, how he didn't meet her eyes. He was hiding something. and for the first time since they'd met, she felt shut out. Days passed. Marcus kept working. Sophie kept drawing. Charlotte kept pretending everything was fine. But the feeling lingered like a door had been closed and locked behind her. Until one afternoon, while helping an elderly tenant with her groceries, Charlotte heard someone whisper, "That's his girl, right? The one staying in 4B?" The other woman glanced down the hall. Wonder if she knows. Knows what? That he used to be someone. The first woman lowered her voice to a hush. Worked on that high-rise project years back, the one that collapsed during construction. 5 people died. He disappeared right after. Charlotte froze. The high-rise collapse. It had been a scandal, a legal mess, covered in the news. Her father had even spoken about it once, shaking his head like it was someone else's tragedy. Poor design. He had said, amateur oversight. No surprise, it fell apart. That night, Charlotte found Marcus in the boiler room, sleeves rolled up, arms covered in grime. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Tell me about the building collapse." Marcus didn't move for a long moment. Then he sat on the workbench, shoulders heavy. "It was my design," he said. "The Northbridge Tower. My firm's biggest project. My signature. My pride." He stared at the wall. "And my mistake." She said nothing. Let him speak. "I warned them about the corners they were cutting, the materials, but they were too focused on cost, and I didn't fight hard enough." A breath. "I was a father, newborn at home, wife recovering. I needed the money, so I signed off." His voice cracked. When the structure gave way, 5 people were inside. 2 workers, 1 electrician, a janitor, and a delivery boy. The media tore us apart. My name was everywhere. He looked at her now, eyes hollow. But I walked away. No jail, no charges, just guilt. My wife couldn't look at me. She died 6 months later. Not because of that, but it didn't help. Charlotte's throat closed up. And after that, I quit. Took Sophie. Went somewhere no one would remember my name. Started cleaning floors instead of building them. Silence filled the space between them. "I'm not a good man, Charlotte," he said quietly. "I let people down. I took the easy road." She walked closer. "You didn't walk away," she said. "You carry it with you, every day." He looked at her, searching. "I've seen men who ruin lives and feel nothing," she added. "You're not one of them." But before Marcus could reply, a loud knock echoed through the hallway above. And then shouting. Children crying. Doors opening. Marcus stood instantly, alert. "Stay here," he said, already moving up the stairs. Charlotte followed. Smoke. A thin veil of it drifting down the 3rd-floor hallway. Someone's kitchen fire. A pan left on the stove. Chaos. Confusion. Tenants pushing out into the hall. Marcus banged on doors, helping an old man down the stairs, scooping a toddler into his arms. He moved without hesitation, every instinct sharpened, every step purposeful. Charlotte helped too, guiding families down the narrow stairwell, coughing, clutching Sophie's hand in hers. When they reached the street, fire trucks roared in, lights flashing, sirens cutting through the night. Charlotte stood, breathless, as Marcus gave instructions to the firefighters like he still belonged on blueprints and construction sites. She realized, in that moment, he had never stopped being who he was. He had just punished himself into forgetting. Later, as smoke curled out of the top-floor windows, Charlotte looked at him. "You saved them." Marcus exhaled, sweat glistening on his brow. "I didn't build the world right last time," he said. "So now I try to protect what's left of it." Charlotte took his hand. "We're all just trying to build again," she whispered, "one piece at a time." He didn't pull away. That night, as Sophie lay asleep between them on the couch, still clutching her bunny, ash smeared on her cheek, Marcus looked at Charlotte. "I never told anyone all of it before. I never had anyone who cared enough to ask," she said. And in the soft glow of a broken lamp, surrounded by smoke-drenched clothes and crayon drawings, they sat side by side. Not healed, but finally whole enough to begin. The fire didn't make the news. Just a small kitchen blaze in a forgotten corner of the city. No one cared. But someone had taken a photo. A blurry shot of Charlotte standing on the curb barefoot in a borrowed sweater, hair tangled, holding a child that wasn't hers. The internet did the rest. By morning, her name was everywhere. Disgraced CEO Charlotte Winslow, seen in rundown tenement holding janitor's child. Once a business darling, now barefoot on the streets? Is she hiding a secret life? Charlotte woke to Marcus pacing the living room, phone in hand, jaw tight. She didn't need to ask. She knew that look. The storm had found her. "Who took it?" she whispered. "Doesn't matter," he said, voice flat. "It's out." She sat slowly, her heart sinking. Marcus looked at her, his calm starting to crack. "They're digging, Charlotte, into the building collapse. My past, Sophie, us." Charlotte blinked. "Us." He hesitated, then nodded. "They think we're together. They're dragging you down with me." By noon, reporters were outside the apartment building. Camera flashes through the windows, questions shouted from the sidewalk. Someone taped an old article about the Northbridge collapse to the front door. Tenant phones started ringing. Gossip filled the halls. Kids pointed. Adults whispered. Maybe she's lying about the baby. Maybe he's the father. Maybe this whole thing was a setup. Charlotte stood in the hallway, surrounded by rumors, the walls closing in. Just like before. Sophie stayed silent, watching it all with wide, worried eyes. Her bunny never left her hands. Marcus tried to shield her, kept the blinds shut, held her close, but he was slipping. Charlotte could see it. The quiet man who had once carried everyone's burdens now carried his own like they were breaking him in half. And then, late that night, he said it. "I think you should leave." Charlotte froze. "What?" Marcus stood at the kitchen counter, staring at nothing. "They won't stop, Charlotte, not until they rip you apart. I can't protect you from that." "I don't want protection," she said softly. I'm not a safe place," he cut in. "I'm not your future." She took a step toward him. "You are. You and Sophie. You don't owe us anything," he snapped, louder now. "This isn't your story. You don't belong in it." Charlotte stood still, chest rising and falling. "And what about Sophie?" she said. "What do I tell her? That I just left?" His shoulders dropped. "That's better than her watching you get destroyed because of me." She left before sunrise. Didn't say goodbye to Sophie. Couldn't. She packed only what she'd arrived with: 2 outfits, a worn coat, and the drawing Sophie made. Marcus watched her from the second-floor window. His fists clenched. His heart silent. He told himself it was the right thing. He told himself it would keep her safe. But when her figure disappeared into the morning fog, something inside him fractured. And this time, there was no one to help him put it back together. 2 weeks passed. Charlotte stayed at a women's shelter downtown. She didn't use her real name. She kept her head down. She waited for the media to move on. And they did. Like sharks that lost the scent. But peace didn't follow. Only emptiness. Each night, she thought about apartment 4B. The broken heater, the peanut butter toast, the way Sophie had started humming again. And Marcus angry. Quiet, guilt-ridden Marcus. She had seen something in him no headline ever could. And now, he was alone again. by his own choice. Then, one afternoon, a small envelope arrived at the shelter. No return address. Just her name. Inside, a child's drawing. 3 stick figures. Only this time, the one with the round belly was gone. 2 were left. 1 man, 1 little girl. Standing apart. No smiles. At the bottom, in shaky crayon, was a name. Sophie. Charlotte felt the breath leave her chest. Sophie remembered. Sophie was waiting. And Marcus? He was punishing himself again. But this time, she wouldn't let him. That night, Charlotte stood at a payphone, wind whipping through her hair. She dialed a number she remembered, even after tossing the sticky note. Marcus answered on the second ring. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Just breath. And silence. And then her voice. Soft. Steady. Unshaken. You don't get to shut the door and call it noble, Marcus. He closed his eyes. I messed up, he whispered. So did I, she said. But we don't heal by running. We heal by staying. The line stayed quiet. Then, finally, come home. When Charlotte stepped off the bus, the city looked different. Not because anything had changed, the same crumbling sidewalks, the same gray sky, but because this time, she wasn't looking for safety. She was coming home. The apartment building stood quietly in the morning fog. No reporters, no whispers, just peeling paint and the echo of her footsteps on the stairs. She reached the second floor and paused. The door to Marcus and Sophie's apartment was already open like they'd been waiting. Marcus stood there, barefoot, holding a mug, eyes dark from sleepless nights. He didn't move, just stared at her like he wasn't sure she was real. Sophie peeked out from behind him. Charlotte knelt down slowly, tears brimming. Hey, she whispered. The little girl didn't say anything. She just ran into her arms. Inside, everything was quiet. The air between Charlotte and Marcus was heavier than it had ever been, not from anger, but from things unsaid. I'm sorry, he said finally. She looked at him. For what? For pushing you out. For thinking I had to carry this alone. For thinking I wasn't allowed to be loved. She stepped closer. You are. He shook his head, voice shaking. I built things, Charlotte. Towers, bridges. I used to think love was like that, something you construct piece by piece, perfectly. His eyes met hers. But with you, it wasn't about building anything. It was about letting the walls fall. Charlotte reached for his hand. Then let them fall. Over the next few days, life began again. But this time, they didn't pretend. Sophie drew pictures with 4 figures, now one with a round belly again, and the other 3 always smiling. Marcus returned to the boiler room and the hallway lights. But now, he wasn't just fixing leaks, he was building something stronger than steel ever could. Charlotte applied to a nonprofit downtown, helping women re-enter the workforce. When asked for her resume, she smiled. I used to run a company, but what I'm proud of, that I learned how to start over. One quiet evening, Charlotte sat on the couch, Sophie curled beside her, bunny in hand. Rain tapped against the windows. Marcus stood in the kitchen, watching them. And then, slowly, he came over. Saturday beside her. Took her hand. You know this won't be easy, he said. She nodded. I don't want easy. He looked at her belly. Do you still want to do this? Alone? She smiled, tears rising. I was never doing it alone. Not really. The next few months passed in slow, beautiful moments. Sophie spoke more. Laughed more. Marcus stopped walking with his shoulders so heavy. Charlotte stopped hiding from mirrors. And when the baby came a girl, With eyes just like her mother's, it wasn't chaos or fear that filled the room. It was quiet. And joy. And wholeness. Marcus held the newborn in his arms and whispered, "You're safe now." All of you. People still talked sometimes. They still whispered. But Charlotte no longer shrank from the weight of being seen. She walked through life with her head high, not because she had everything, but because she had finally learned what mattered. One evening, as the sun set in gold behind the city skyline, Marcus stood on the rooftop with Charlotte beside him, the baby asleep in her sling, Sophie drawing chalk hearts at their feet. He looked at the woman who once arrived at his doorstep, shivering and broken. And he smiled. "You ever think we were supposed to meet?" Charlotte leaned into him, eyes full of quiet fire. "No," she said. "I think we were supposed to save each other."
What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family drama, shocking betrayals, and the revenge stories you won't believe.